right. I'm here today with Jasmine Ober, CEO of Pitch Genius. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Eric. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today. We've known each other for a little while now, and with everything going on in the market around fundraising and so on, I figured it was definitely a great time to have you come on the show. So we're gonna have some fun stuff to talk about.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
So you are the CEO of Pitch Genius, which is a company that helps companies prepare for fundraising, prepare their pitch deck, and ultimately get funded. How did you find this opportunity? How did you get into this?
Well, I was working for angel investors at the time who were basically helping startups get through building their deck, due diligence, and then closing the deal. But it was through that experience I got to sit on countless pitches to groups of angel investors, and then listen to the investors deliberate once the founders left the room. And this was like 8 years ago at this point. But what I noticed is that, I knew how hard those founders were working to get into that room. But so many of them came completely unprepared and botched their pitch and botched their opportunity with these investors to the point where their pitch was bad enough the investors wouldn't even talk about them once they left the room, which I felt was so sad. And me being the like young and doe-eyed person that I was fresh out of school, I was like, that was actually a great company, but no, it literally just fell on deaf ears. So I knew that founders needed a lot of help. I had a special affinity. I had an affinity towards building decks and the just formal training on it from school, because I have a degree in entrepreneurship somehow, and they teach you how to build investor decks there.
Same here, yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, once I realized there was just a really big need to support founders, and founders didn't understand how important their pitch deck was, I started to just kind of freelance and build decks, and now it's 8-9 years later, and I have a whole methodology around how to pitch investors, and have an even bigger focus on how to prepare for due diligence. So it's kind of this like holistic approach for preparing for fundraising.
Wow. Yeah. So I as a founder and a longtime member of the startup community, I feel that pain so well. I've worked in co-working spaces and so with a whole bunch of startups, and we would actually have this support group where we would get together and sort of coach each other and tear each other's deck apart and try to give each other feedback on prepping. And, the lesson learned there was that we were all super focused on building something, super focused on, our mission, but didn't really take the time to tell a good story. Didn't really take a good time to actually connect all the pieces together in something coherent that explains to an investor who has a completely different set of criteria, right? What they need to hear in order to write that check, and we all fell flat, and we all did our best to kind of prop each other up and help each other prepare. But man, I wish I knew you. I wish I knew you 10 years ago.
Exactly. What we like to say is, let us do the heavy lifting when it comes to the investor deck and what you need to be saying and what you need to include in the pitch and what you need to include in your data room, so you can focus on two things that we can't control, right? Which is your pitch and how you practice the pitch and the confidence that you build in giving the pitch, and then also traction. Like, do you really need to be spending your time building slides, or should you be worried about building more traction as you're fundraising? Like, that's really what's important to the investor. The pitch is something that just becomes this huge barrier that we remove. So I hear you on your experience. It's a good learning process, but I'm of the mindset that you can outsource a lot of that to people that know how to do it well.
So what are some of the things that founders get wrong?
How long it takes to fundraise, how much time they should be putting into actually preparing for their fundraising campaign. I mean, I don't think that I don't think a lot of founders realize that it is a campaign within itself, and that they should invest in their process and what they're going to present, because every investor introduction, every lead is important. So I think when you go to market with a pitch deck that investors are like, oh, okay, great, like, love what you're doing, but your pitch deck needs work. It's like, it's just kind of like a stab in the eye. Like, I hate that. I hate that so much. So I think it's like time expectations and this realization that investing in your approach is going to actually get you to close your round faster. So I think it's that. And then what else? Oh yeah, go for it.
So again, feeling this pain, founders not realizing how long it takes to really close a deal. I mean, we all kind of know it's painful. They say like, oh, you got to talk to 40 different VCs or whatever it is to close a round. But, it's basically a full-time job for 3 to 6 months. And as a CEO, you're obviously taking your foot off the gas on running your business so that you can go and focus. So as myself, as a CTO and a head of product, I've actually had to step in as interim CEO while my co-founder is out raising money. Now I'm down here in San Diego, and so it's sort of a thing here that a lot of times founders actually have to fly to the Bay Area and live there for several months to raise money and manage remotely and so on. And so I've held down the fort on multiple occasions during that time. And so the longer that process takes, the more steam is being pulled out of actually running your business and getting, the growth you need at the most critical time. So
Absolutely.
anything you can do to accelerate that is killer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the biggest problem with not realizing how much time it takes is that you also find founders that have like 3 months left in their runway. They're like, we really need to raise capital, and they don't have a pitch ready. And it's like, you're so much later than you even realize, because by the time you get this pitch up and running and you close this deal, now you're raising capital when runway is so tight to the point where the investor, maybe no investor would be interested, because you waited to the 11th hour and you put your startup in the position of potentially failing because you're going to run out of cash. So
and the ones who will take you are going to be like loan sharks, right? They're going to tighten the screws on you.
Exactly. Oh yeah, they're gonna take advantage of that situation. Absolutely. So
what are some of the things that founders get wrong in the pitch itself, in the deck or in the presentation?
Their market sizing is always incorrect. Like, it's just either the market research and the market sizing, I feel like it's so light and it's so it's not taken seriously, because founders feel like the market's clearly big enough, right? And so if I just include a TAM, then that's enough, because they'll just see it's big enough and they can make a return on their investment, and that's all I need to communicate. But your market sizing and the market research does so much more than that, right? These are data points that you're using to sell the opportunity, to tell a story about the market opportunity. And then the market sizing, you're using that to tell a story about how you're going to enter the market and how you're going to grow within this market, and the markets you plan on capturing now and then later. And it communicates, execution. It communicates planning. It communicates that you understand this market like the back of your hand. So, founders often keep it so light, and they think it's not important. And the reality is that it is. And the one of the first things investors do once they decide, all right, this is a opportunity that I'm actually interested in, they're going to start Googling, right? They're going to start doing their own market research. So a part of our methodology and belief is lead that conversation for them, right? Don't just pitch the opportunity based on your gut and your industry expertise. Your industry expertise is great, but validate everything that you're saying in the story with research. So,
I'm an executive coach, and I work with founders and helping them kind of through the growth stages to become a scaled up, mature executive. And one of the common areas that I coach on, I call it, transitioning from being a founder to being an executive. So I have these two sort of personas, and what's the difference between being a founder and being an executive? There's a lot of different ways, but one of which is a founder, when it relates to leadership, when it relates to investing and so on, they're focused on the story, the vision of the future. And so when they go in and they're giving that pitch, they're really just painting this picture, this very rich story and sometimes believable about a possible future that they're trying to realize.
Totally.
But an executive has a business plan.
Yeah.
An executive has a strategy. An executive knows exactly how they're going to get there to realize that vision. And that's, I think, something, especially in the early stages, where I think it's what you're talking about here, is a founder comes in, they've got this great story about the future, but they don't actually have the nuts and bolts to convince an investor that they know how to get there.
100%. That's also something founders miss all the time in their deck, is like their execution strategy is either non-existent or it's super light. It's like, hey, we need all of this money to realize this big vision, but we didn't really plan or cost out exactly how we're going to spend that money, or how we're going to execute that plan, and how we're going to get there. And it's like, hey, how? and then you say, okay, well, where's your financial model? And they're like, well, we're pre-seed or we're seed. We don't need a financial model. We don't need financial projections. And I said, and I'll say, no, it's not about your revenue projections. Where is your financial model? Like, do you know exactly how much you're going to raise for this round? How long that money is going to last you? How much this entire thing's going to cost that you want to execute on? They're like, well, and so you're just like, founders miss that all the time too. It's like execution strategy, and then how much it's going to cost to get there with this round of funding, right? Or to get a certain portion of the way, whatever.
I call that the underpants gnome syndrome.
Yeah.
An old South Park reference, right? Step 1, steal underpants.
Yeah.
Step 3, profit.
I love that you just brought that up. That's great.
It happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
So actually, and it's happening more and more too. So, I'm coaching a lot of young founders now that are in their, early mid-20s. That, the last time we had a financial crisis, they were in high school, maybe middle.
Yeah.
And so this is the first time that, they just have a completely different worldview.
Yeah.
And some of these founders actually were able to raise money just on the story.
Yeah.
And I have a few founders that actually don't even have a board. So they actually raised money with no oversight. And so I actually, as a coach, I set up a mock board, and I actually forced them to go through the exercise. I'm like, you got to have a business model. You got to have unit economics. You got to have projections. Like every few months, you need to inspect your business and see how it's running. And it's actually kind of scary how few people are doing that today with diligence.
Yeah, I think thankfully that's changing. But it's so great that you're doing that for them, because that's another thing is like, we do all this market research and financial modeling for our clients, and we really get them prepared for that due diligence process. But it's not just for the investor, it's for the founder themselves, right? It's like, this is not just about them. This is also about you, because this is your reputation, your company, your blood, sweat, and tears. And you want a little bit of insurance to know that, like, you have your hands on the rail, and like you're really owning this company.
Right. Well, the funny thing is, it doesn't end when you close the round, right?
No, it just
we got the money, great, let's go party, right? No, you actually have to execute.
Yeah.
Wow. So tell me more. What are some other things that I'm loving this by? What are some other pitfalls or things that founders fall into when they're fundraising?
Yeah. I think that the exit strategy question comes up often, and it stumps founders all the time. And I think that telling investors about your exit strategy has always been like a controversial topic, but here's my take on it. At the end of the day, like, we want to know if there's a path to exit, because that's when the investor makes their money, right? Just period. Whether you're going to IPO one day or whether someone's going to buy you out. And so I don't even care if you're a pre-seed company. Like, you can do research to figure out what the M&A landscape looks like now, and maybe like what people are predicting will look like in 6 years from now. And are you building the company to exit? Because that's when the investor makes their money. And sure, unless it's like debt financing, but investors aren't really looking to like give out loans and then make a return on that loan. They really want it to be, turn into equity and to have the company exit at some point. So anyways, I have a lot of founders that, we tell them like, let's get your exit strategy slide in here. Let's do the research so we can have that portion of your pitch locked down. And they'll say, oh, like when investors ask me about our exit strategy, I just laugh. No, don't laugh. I blame investors for this, because there was this period of time where investors were really interested in investing in companies that were going to be the next, Facebook, and like long haul companies that were going to be around. Like, they were not going to just get bought out quickly. And so the conversation changed, where investors were like, and just some investors, not all investors, but some new, younger investors, the ones that were kind of newer on the block, were like, don't talk to me about your exit strategy. You're too young. You're too early. And yeah, I think it gotten founders in this mindset of like, we're too young, we're too early to think about that or talk about that. But the reality is the investor is going to ask. Okay. And so you can be prepared with some research, or you can just be prepared with a statement that's like, we're open to all possibilities. We know, it's early right now, but at the end of the day, like, we see that the most likely exit route for us is, being acquired by a larger company that looks like this. I don't know, but yeah, that's something that founders miss all the time as well.
So, in my coaching and in all my content and everything, I'm very big on empathy, not just, feel good vibes, whatever, but actually as a way to really understand other people and what their incentives are and their drivers and behavior. And this is an area too, where I think a lot of founders get wrong, is they're not really thinking like an investor, right? When they're putting that pitch together, you're creating something for an audience, for them to make a decision. So getting in the mind of an investor, what do you think are some of the key things that they're looking for?
I think before you can I see the pitch in hurdles. Okay. The first hurdle is getting them to understand what you do, like in the most basic sense. Like, that's hurdle number one. If you can get there, and then hurdle number two, which is just telling them all of the basic information they need to hear, so they feel like you're a sound and founder that understands even like what the relationship is and what the investor's perspective is, right?
Pause right there for one moment. As an angel investor myself, the number one feedback that I always hear from other investors is, I just don't get it.
Yes,
like
exactly.
You're right. It's not only the first, it's probably the biggest filtering criteria is, I just don't get it. And none of that other stuff matters. If I just don't understand it, you know what? It's just not for me.
Exactly. And you need to get that over that hurdle within like the first 2 minutes of the pitch. Otherwise, like, everything else, just as you said, everything else that's coming out of your mouth doesn't matter, because they have nothing to apply it to, because they didn't understand like the thing. But that always hurts. That always hurts. I like to watch pitch competitions and hear investors ask questions, because it just keeps everything top of mind and keeps me abreast of like what investors are asking about these days. But yeah, whenever they ask like, wait, so what's the product, or like, how does it work? The worst. That's how you know your pitch just like didn't do anything for you. But yeah.
Okay, so if they can tell a compelling story, make it relatable, connect the dots very quickly, what comes next?
Okay, so the second hurdle in my mind is, again, like, checking off all the boxes for what the investor needs to hear to just see the investment opportunity, see the market as a whole. Okay, so there's just like hurdle number one, get them to understand what you do and get them to understand it very quickly. Hurdle number 2 is make sure to check off all the boxes that the investor needs you to speak on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your competition, this is something that I sometimes see founders missing within their deck. They don't have a competitive analysis slide. And then you ask them like, oh, well, we don't feel strongly about our competitors. Like, I don't really, or we don't, what's even worse is like, we don't have any competitors, which we all know isn't true. And at the end of the day, it's like, but the investor is going to expect you to talk about that. So let's include a slide. Like, don't just skip over it because you're trying to get your slide count down, right? It's going to be a huge red flag if you don't at least mention it. Fine, maybe it's like a 20-second pitch, but you have to.
And by the way, it's just a aside on there, right? Everyone has competition. If it's nothing else, then it's whatever people were doing before. Maybe there isn't somebody that's providing a similar solution to you that's going head to head, but this isn't a new problem unless we, evolve and grow new arms and legs or something. Right? Every problem is just, or every solution is just a continuation of what came before. So whether it's doing nothing and just living with the problem or some antiquated solution that you're trying to disrupt, there's no such thing as no competition. And to say that is honestly, it's so naive that I think it would get you laughed out of the room.
100%. And yeah, that's again, like I hate to harp on research, but it's so important to refresh your understanding of your competitors and who they are, because there are new ones popping up all the time. And it's so important to do that right before you go out to fundraise, because I promise you these investors have either spoken directly to your new competitors and have been pitched by them as well, or, it's kind of a small world. It is a small world and it's a small community at the end of the day.
So I have a story to tell about this exact thing. I have a story to tell about competition. So in San Diego, we have a really big biotech and life sciences sector here. So our angel networks are pretty dominated by life sciences companies.
Yeah.
And so I'm in this angel forum and, founders getting up and giving their pitch, and their product was around sort of helping doctors write prescriptions. And there was this tech platform for writing prescriptions. And they said exactly this, like, there's nobody competing in this market. We're the first to market. And a person in the audience who was a doctor, is a lot of, angel investors tend to be a lot of doctors and retired doctors and whatnot. Yeah. He stands up and he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out that little pad of paper that they scribble the prescriptions on. Yeah. And he says, this is your competition right here.
Yeah.
He said, it takes me no time. He's like, you want to know how much doctors care about this problem? We can't even write our name on it. We're just going to scribble something as quickly as possible, rip it off, throw it in the air, hope that a nurse catches it as we're rushing to our next patient. 100%. Do you think that I'm going to want to sit down in front of a computer and fill out this form?
I love it.
Absolutely took the air out of the room. They did not get invested in. And not to say there wasn't any value or validity to their solution, but to discount or disregard a low-tech, lo-fi solution that has worked for so long was almost insulting to an audience of people that were living and breathing it every day. So
absolutely,
there is always competition no matter what.
Exactly. And that's like, for that, I mean, that's a behavior that is longstanding and is a barrier to your market entry at this point. So you really, really need to talk about it.
Right? Inertia, right? Inertia is your biggest competitor. Doing nothing. Putting up with suffering is your biggest competitor, right? We all deal with struggle and strife every single day. And it takes work to change and try something new, even if it actually gets us to a better place. So, so don't be naive.
Totally, yeah. And like final piece of advice there is like, let's say you're a founder that truly believes you have no competitors. Don't say that. Just still never say it, because the second those words come out of your mouth, you like ears turn off, and that's the thing, is like, you can say things that perk the ears of investors, or you can say things that will just totally turn them off, and your pitch is done from the moment that you speak those words on.
Yeah.
So
Actually, one of the things that was incredibly eye-opening for me, and something I recommend every founder do, is find an angel network and go sit in the audience and
mm,
watch the pitches from
yeah,
that perspective, right?
yeah,
Again, build that empathy. But one thing too is not only angels, but every investor, they see this over and over and over again, right? They see these patterns. They see dozens and dozens of these pitches. And this is just one example of those cliches that just turn somebody off, right?
totally.
Either A, you just blend into the crowd and there's nothing special, everybody says it, or B, it's actually a trigger that they hate hearing because, they probably made a mistake somewhere in the past, invested in a company that was naive and lost their money. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And the new trigger right now is we're going to be the next $1 billion unicorn company, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
and it's so interesting because that happens with founders. They hear like this tagline that's working and that, other startups are raising on that premise of like, we're going
Mhm.
to be the next $1 billion company. And then everybody starts copying it. And then
Mhm.
investors get to the point where they're like, I swear, if I hear this version of a
Yeah.
pitch ever again, I'm gonna punch a founder in the face.
Yeah.
So and it like, yeah, it just happens all the time. It also happened with the line of like, we're democratizing, blah, 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 blah. And it's like,
Yep.
hey, let's be a little more unique. I've heard this pitch 1,000 times. Like, I don't
Yeah.
care what you're democratizing. Like, I'm not listening anymore.
So I was having drinks with a VC fairly recently, and he painted this picture. He said, exactly because of this culture, everybody's claiming to be the next unicorn. So the VCs are sitting there thinking it's a parade of donkeys with carrots stuck to their head
Yeah.
over and over and over again, right?
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's hilarious.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. So all right, you've got your story. They get it. You give justice to the competition. You paint the picture. What are some of the other hurdles that they're looking for?
I would say, we were talking about this in a different call, but like, a lot of founders kind of fudge what's happening
Mm,
in their company or in their investor deck. And it's kind of become a bigger problem these days because founders are getting sued. And it's like a big
mhm,
concern with some of our clients.
mm,
Of course, you're not like legally obligated to anything within your pitch deck. Okay. Like,
mhm,
it's a plan, it's a business plan. Once you have the money in hand, once you're in the market, like everything could possibly change. And so that's why a lot of founders are like, oh, like we don't know if we want to put this in our deck because we don't know if we want to commit to it. It's like, well, if it's a plan, investors understand plans are subject to change. Like you're going to listen to whatever the market is telling you. But whatever is in the deck that should be valid, right,
mhm,
needs to be valid. Whatever, like you can't fudge anything. Don't fake the funk to get the money because in the
mhm.
long run, it's just going to hurt you. It's going to hurt that investor. It's going to hurt all of the employees that you're bringing on, right? So there's
Yeah.
this when we talk about storytelling, right?
Mhm.
Let's not confuse that with fabricating.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
fabricate anything. And sometimes we have founders that want to hide things about their company. That they're like, this was a really bad thing, and investors are not going to want to invest because of it. And
Mhm.
reality is like no company has this like, especially a startup has a perfect linear story that is
Mhm.
like, yeah, everything was just like a green light and it all worked out perfectly.
Yeah.
No, what
Well,
startup has that trajectory? None.
they're gonna find out, right?
You're
And you
gonna
can be
find out
honest about it up front, or you can let them find the skeleton in the closet, and then you're gonna
exactly.
break that trust. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
So
yeah, go
this
for it.
comes up a lot around valuations as well, right? Founders have this healthy to unhealthy level of delusion. I mean,
Yeah.
you kind of have to be a founder. You'd be crazy
Yeah.
otherwise, right? So they have this delusion and they're trying to paint this very rosy picture and always trying to kind of inflate your valuations, right?
Yeah.
Because we want to be successful and have more money and so on. But what ends up happening is in the early stages, there's a lot of possibility, but eventually reality sets in. And the farther you get down the road, the more inflated the valuations were up front, the more difficulty you're going to have later on down the line when early investors, including you, are going to have to take a haircut when you get a flat or a down valuation. So
Oh,
being
and
realistic.
and everybody
I mean,
loses at that point.
everybody
And
loses. Exactly. Yep.
yeah.
So I have an MBA in entrepreneurship, and a lot of founders will kind of poke at me and say, you got a degree in pessimism. All I know how to do is find the flaws and shoot things down and kill great ideas. And so what I like to say, there's balance in it. And I like to say I have kind of a stark realism. And
Yes.
part of my journey in working with founders is not to kill the optimism and kill the dream, but to kind of tether it to the ground, tether it to
Yes.
reality. And that is having a strategy and having a business plan and all that things we were talking about here. So you want to definitely talk about what's possible, but
Yeah.
anything that's actually true,
Yeah.
anything that you actually have data for, you just have to be forthcoming about it, or it's going to hurt you in the long run.
Absolutely. And I think investors can tell based on your pitch deck whether it's all pie in the sky or whether it really is tethered to the ground. And you can either show them that it's tethered to the ground, or you can show them that, we're making just big, grandiose vision statements and have no execution behind it. So,
okay. So this is awesome. So we're getting through these challenges here. So, all right, we've got a great story. We've got a realistic picture of the landscape. We got some kind of a plan. What else do we need to have a really compelling pitch?
I think that so let's talk about like types of stories. So the story needs to be right. A lot of founders, they hear storytelling and they go after telling their personal story. Which for some founders, that is the right story, right? Because that's the origination story, maybe your early stage. That's kind of like the strongest, most emotional story that will get investors interested in learning about the founder, which they absolutely want. But it's not appropriate for everyone. And again, I really think it depends on the stage. We recently brought on a client who is a former VC, has multiple exits, is a founder of a new company, and he got totally stuck on building his own deck, even though he's built hundreds of them. I don't know. Think about how many decks he's created in his life, how many he's reviewed. I mean, he's been in the VC seat himself. But he got totally stuck on what to pitch and what his story would be for his new genomics company. And, when speaking with him over the phone, he was like super passionate about the fact that this was going to change people's lives and this could cure cancer. And, genomics is the future of healthcare, but we just have no way of administering it. But you look at the pitch deck and it was just all numbers. Like he had every single number that a VC could possibly want to review because he knows, right? He used to be one, or he used to actively invest. And so, we just took a seat. We sat back and I was like, Joe, like your passion and your like care and the impact that this is going to have on people's lives, that's what's missing from the story. And that's really what matters here, right? Isn't it? Like, let's just like cut down on the numbers and checking off all of those boxes just a little so we can bring in the emotional aspect of the story. I think that that's something that gets missed often is we get so hyped up on wanting to prove to investors that it's a good investment opportunity that we go street business. But like a lot of investors want to see change in the world, want for the better, and they care about people. They're not like stone cold VCs and investors that just want to invest in things that will only make money. Like if there's impact, then that's an added plus. So
I would argue that it is actually a really important driver for VCs, even though they might try to justify that it's all about the money, right? Or it's all about the numbers. They're human. We're all human. And we all do. We all make decisions and then we use logic and reason to justify our emotional decision. It's just part of being human. And so the same thing, right? You're investing we say we invest in the team. Okay, well, that really means we're investing in that human story.
Yeah.
right? We're investing in the mission. We're investing in the cause. Well, that's, again, what's the story of the people who are actually going to be impacted by this thing? And
Yeah.
then, not to say that the numbers don't matter, but if you're telling a great story about the mission and about the founder, the VCs will want to make the numbers work.
Yes.
Right? They'll
100.
want to see it all fit together and might suspend disbelief a little bit. But if you're missing that, well, then the numbers all have to line up perfectly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's the, just as you said, it's the emotion that drives the action. And so what emotion can you elicit during that conversation that gets them excited about the opportunity, or really emotionally invested in you and your personal story, or, whatever other route. And again, it does not need to be a personal story. You can elicit emotion in multiple ways. Just figure out really, like, how can you hit home? How can you hit and pull on the strings of these investors that's going to excite them, get them emotionally invested? Okay, and then I'll take a step back and say, there are some startups that are solving problems where there is, like, really no emotion. Like, there's no emotional problem or even real problem that they're solving, or there's just not, there isn't that they can lean on to tell a good story. Maybe even their personal connection to the story is just like, I just knew that this would make a lot of money, right? And it's kind of there. And that's okay too, right? That's okay too. But you can still tell a story and bring emotional elements in by talking about the market opportunity, talking about maybe the user persona, like who is using the product and what is the emotion they're feeling, whatever it may be. But it's
another quick story. So I have a client that they make IT software, like print services and just, really boring stuff, right? I love them. Great people, great team, great people. But they knew they just had this sort of dull business. And they got big and they built a great business on top of that, and that was fine. But then they wanted to expand and grow the team and enter new market segments, and really struggled with the storytelling piece. And so I asked, well, like, who are your customers? Government and schools and hospital, like really boring stuff. And I go, really? Like, government impacts people in a lot of different ways. Like, let's pick a department. Child and family services. There are, imagine a single parent trying to get assistance for to feed their children, right? Social Security. Your grandma is trying to get her benefits so she can, stay in her home. Schools, teaching our children and preparing them for the future. Hospitals, right? Doctors giving, trying to create better outcomes for their patients. Like, there are incredible stories here. You just have to move one or two levels beyond what you're doing today. We don't make IT software for government. We help single parents provide for their children. We help doctors provide better patient outcomes. We help schools take better care of their children, or better care of their students. And that just unraveled into this incredible story, because as a big company, over 100 million a year in revenue, there were, I don't want to say infinite, but my gosh, there were thousands of different stories that could be told. And now it's just, we just get to pluck one, and for every deck, for every meeting, for every person they hire, it's just, well, let's just pick a story, and they're all super impactful.
I love that. That's amazing.
So even if you think you have a boring business, take a couple steps and see whose lives are we impacting here.
Totally. Right. So how about this? Let me flip some questions your way, since you are an angel investor and you obviously have been pitched a lot. And we'll focus on the positive too.
Yeah.
What is something you love that founders do when you get pitched, and or you're in the room when that type of pitch is taking place?
Yeah, good question. Well, again, I think kind of what we talked about, right? Having a strong personal impact story, right? Whether it's their own journey about some experience or pain or suffering that they've had, and they decided to take up this cause, and now this is their mission to help other people like them, or to change something in the world, or taking real personal stories of people who had a problem and who need a solution, and how this thing has come, to make a difference. That's the first and foremost, the thing that I look for is that empathy, that personal connection. And then, yeah, really, what is the game plan here? What's the strategy? Who's your competition? Have you done your homework? And is there, obviously, there's the fuzziness in the probability of the future, but can you paint some realistic scenarios that show me how you can win? And that's kind of it, to be honest. Make me care emotionally and show me that you've done your due diligence. And
why?
And we can
So
talk.
why, for you as an investor, why does the empathy piece matter so much? Why do founders with empathy stand out to you?
Yeah. Maybe it's just me and who I am, but I want to put my money behind causes that I believe in. I want to invest in companies. To be honest, as an angel investor, I guess I just don't care as much about the return. I care more about the impact. And so, I invest in several clean tech and electric vehicle companies. I invest in, I'm an investor in Impossible Foods and meat-free, foods and that sort of thing. I invest in some healthcare companies, but that are really patient focused and really focused on improving patient outcomes. So that's it. I mean, that's, I guess who I am is I want to make an impact and a difference in the world. And I do that through my work, through my coaching, through this podcast, but then also through my investing. I guess that's why I'm an angel and not a VC. Not to dog on VCs a little bit, but that's you're right,
No, they deserve it. They've earned it.
So let's talk about, so you're, you offer this service obviously to engage with founders and help them, develop their pitch and get funding. What are, what does an engagement look like with you, and what are some of the results that you've been able to provide?
Yeah, great question. So typically we're taking our founders through a 6 to 8 week process to prepare them to pitch and for due diligence. So that's doing everything from financial modeling, market sizing, market research, building the deck itself, and then making sure that they're prepared to answer any and every question the investor is going to ask, and then organizing it all in a pretty data room. And really, that for the experienced founder, we're able to just do the heavy lifting that they don't have time to do. For the founder that's raising capital for the first time, we get to hold their hand through the process and really get them prepared for what to expect, because they've never raised capital before, but they have great companies, great traction that can absolutely raise. So we like to wash the green off of those founders that are raising capital for the first time, in addition to setting them up with a strong pitch and a strong data room. So,
by the way, let's bring that out. So that we've talked a lot about the pitch, but the data room is something that, if you haven't experienced this before, is incredibly painful. In fact, I was at a conference this week where there was a founder who had just sold a bootstrapped company for $100 million. So holy crap.
Nice.
And he said the single hardest thing that he had to do in that business was the data room.
Yeah.
And he actually had screenshots of all the folders and all the due diligence and everything. And he was like, all I was doing was building a company. I was focusing on running the business. But then when everybody actually wanted to see, well, what are your processes and your policies and all of your financial models and blah, 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 he's like, it's everywhere and nowhere. And, I haven't even... And so this was actually, again, because it was bootstrapped, this was at the exit, right? So he'd run this company for 6-7 years, bootstrapped, never had to do any of this. And then all of a sudden, somebody wanted to write him $100 million check, and he had to put all of this stuff together. It took him months and months and months. And so, again, not to discount the value there, I think that that's actually a huge service that you're providing that is often overlooked.
Totally. Yeah. And a lot of our job, we can't produce a lot of what ends up in the data room. What we do is we give them a major heads up to know what to expect and to know what to put in their data room, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not going to be cost or time efficient for us to figure out what their sales process is and create a beautiful diagram. It also doesn't need to be super pretty. It just needs to be clean and organized. And what happens most of the time is founders, they go into their pitch process, and then the investor's like, okay, great, now here's a long list of things I need to see before I invest. And they're like, oh shit. And
Yeah.
we founders reach out to us at this point all the time where they're like, we don't know what this means. We don't know what they're asking for. And,
Yeah.
it's been a week since we had the meeting with the investor, and now they're worried about this like hot lead going cold. And it's like, okay,
Yeah. Well, it's
again.
like, you're going out on a date and you dress
Yeah.
all nice and everything
Yeah.
good. And then they come over to your house and it's, skeleton falling out of the closet and underwear all hanging from the lampshade, So yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The pitch is the introduction. It's the dating, right? And then once you actually get in and start doing their due diligence, whether it's doing their own Google research and looking at the market or
Yeah.
looking at the inside of your company, that's where again people are gonna take flight if it's not good. So
Exactly. And it's like, think about the difference it makes in your overall presentation pitch when you're
Mhm.
prepared for that, right? It's
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
investors are looking to invest in companies that are ready to take capital today and
Yeah,
execute on it and
exactly,
grow their company with it, right? When
exactly.
you can't even show up with an organized data room and be prepared to accept the funding,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
if you're not prepared for due diligence, then you're not prepared to accept the money right now.
yeah, yeah,
Then again, the investor is like, all right, like you take your time. I'm gonna go look at a couple of other deals, see who is ready to accept a check right now. So
yeah.
that's the other aspect of it.
Right. Not just the dog and pony show, but actually have the stuff to back it up. That's the
Exactly.
name of the game. Well,
Exactly.
Jasmine, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today. Obviously, again, I've been a fan of yours for a long time, and I love the work that you do. So
Thank
for
you.
anybody out there who's getting ready to raise a round, go to pitchgenius.co. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, you
All
got
right.
that right.
Awesome. Thank you, Jasmine. Take care.